Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marie Herman, and I'm the owner of MRH Enterprises LLC. I am so happy to be here this week for Executive Secretary Magazine, hosting this week's edition of adminchat. Today, I'm going to be talking about lessons learned from a fried laptop. I had some issues a few years ago with my laptop where it crashed and burned, and I learned an awful lot of lessons the hard way as a result of that experience. And so I want to share what happened with you and give you some ideas for things that you can do in the future to be better prepared for any issues with your technology, hopefully preventing issues as well, so that you don't have to go through the horrific experience that I did with my own laptop. So today I am going to focus on a couple of key areas. I'm going to talk about the most common issues that computers tend to experience. I'm going to talk about preventive steps that you can take to prevent your data. We're going to look at some smart ways to mitigate that damage. And we're also going to look at how you can reconstruct the data afterwards if the worst case scenario happens. How do you put it all together? How do you move forward? So I'm going to share some of the insights that I gained from this whole experience. So what happened to me? Well, a couple of years ago, middle December, I was typing away happily on my computer when it just died in the middle of a sentence that I was typing. And at first I thought, well, maybe the cable came loose and I just didn't notice it. Maybe I didn't notice a battery getting low message, although that seemed to be a lot of things to not notice, but maybe it could happen if I was really immersed in what I was doing. I just might not have paid attention. And so maybe my battery died. And I wondered, again, why didn't I see any messages? But I tried first. My very first effort was, of course, plugging in the cords. And so checking the electric outlet to make sure it hadn't gotten loose at that end, checking the plug into the back of the computer, making sure that wasn't the problem. And in reality, nothing worked with that. There was definitely no power getting to the computer, or there was no response from the computer to the power. I tried pressing the power button. And of course, I did the standard power button where I just touched it. Nothing happened. So I tried my go to, which is cold reboot, pressing and holding the power button on a laptop for, 10 seconds or so. And that usually reboots it with an actual cold reboot full start. And unfortunately, nothing happened. My computer was deader than a doornail. And so I knew, of course, very bad. This is very, very bad. I put my computer into my backpack and I headed off to my local Best Buy, which is the computer store where I purchased my computer and where I had the extended warranty to be able to repair it. When I arrived there, they told me they would have it back to me around January 5th, which would have been about 2, 3 weeks later after I was dropping it off. That wasn't great news, but it was doable. I could work around that. And so I figured this was Christmas and New Year's. And even though, I had a big study group starting at the beginning of January, I figured I could make do until then. I was going to be working lighter anyway for the holidays, so this was doable. I would figure it out. Well, let's just say mistakes were made. It didn't work out quite as well as I had hoped. Now, one of the biggest problems was that I made some assumptions. And the classic phrase of when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And that's pretty much what happened. I made these assumptions and I didn't clarify some of the things with the computer store. That's on me. So, some of the assumptions I made. First, I thought the computer store was going to do the work in house. Nope, they did not. They took one quick look at it, figured out it wasn't something like pressing the power button, and decided they had to ship it out to their facility in another state to do the work. I was not thrilled, but okay, I get it. They have to do it. You have to do what you have to do. Then I thought the computer company would have had it travel decently quickly. Nope. They shipped it ground. Shipping a package ground delivery in the few weeks prior to Christmas, well, that means it doesn't arrive for at least a week. And sure enough, that was how long it took. It took a week to get to the facility in what would normally have been a 1 to 2 day delivery turnaround time. Had I known that, I actually would have offered to pay to have it shipped there next day. But because I was making assumptions, I didn't have that option. Third, I figured that the computer company would have a system for getting to computers in a timely fashion. Nope. Being the holidays, they actually did not even look at it until the 2nd of January. And you'll remember they had told me it would be done by the 5th of January. So clearly we were getting down to the wire here. It wasn't going to be here on time. There was no way they were going to have it back to me on time. January 2nd, they finally took a look at it, and that's when they recognized that they would need a part to be ordered. So, my fourth assumption, I figured that by consolidating their service center into one facility, that this computer place would have the parts on site for most computers, and so they could turn it around quicker. Nope, that was not accurate. They had to order out the parts, and so that took multiple days to arrive. Clearly, my computer was not coming back in time. So I called the hotline for the company where I discovered that any escalation needed to go directly through the store. And that would be the first of many, many phone calls that I would be making. So even after calling the store and speaking to them and escalating it and talking to management, it took weeks. Took weeks. One of the things I had requested is that because it was taking so long that they ship the laptop back to me by next day air. That did not happen either. They sent it back ground. So there were just a number of assumptions made along the way that made me particularly unhappy. Had I taken the time to really ask more questions up front and to learn more about the process and to find out how things were going to be set up and what were the contingency plans, I would have made a number of different decisions. So what ended up happening was 6 weeks worth of back and forth phone calls. And I finally got my computer back, but it was really a struggle for me. And because my business is dependent on my computer, it was a challenge for my business as well. Now, I had actually done some preparation work. I was making backups of my data. And so there were decisions that I chose based on that knowledge that in hindsight I would have chosen differently. And so I'm going to share with you a little about what I learned as a result of all this and what I would do differently if it happens again and how I can be more careful going forward. And hopefully you'll be able to take this knowledge for yourself as well. I know that many of you have information technology departments who are taking care of backups for your computers, but I'm going to have some thoughts to share about that as well. And this is based on having a husband who does IT and our experience with that. So I'm going to talk about some of the things where even if your IT department is doing your backups, you may still want to have some additional options to consider just in case you were to lose your data. And these days, of course, many of us are going to have computers at home that we're responsible for ourselves. And so I want you to take this knowledge home with you. Think about the computers in your house, maybe your kids' computers, maybe yours, and what you can do to prevent issues in the future. So, what are some of the most common issues that you are likely to encounter with any computer anywhere? I mean, no computer is flawless when it comes to working. They all end up having some issues, some more than others. And so, what would be some of the common issues that you might encounter? Well, one is the need to keep your software updated. Software gets updated for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they're adding new functionality, sometimes they're fixing past bugs, They're tweaking things to make it run more efficiently. There's a lot of reasons why software is continually worked on. Plus, the operating systems, the browsers that software is currently running on also gets updated regularly, and the software needs to be updated to keep up with those changes. So there's a lot of reasons, as I said, that software does need to be updated. There's something called the Windows blue screen of death. It's an older term. It doesn't happen as often, perhaps, but it does still happen. This is where your computer runs into some kind of a problem that it can't handle, and it just throws up this error message and basically won't let you do anything else until you restart your system. One of the things that can cause issues that cause this blue screen of death or other error messages is missing or corrupted drivers. Drivers can sometimes get corrupted through regular use. And you'll see this most often with things like peripherals, your printers, where you might need to delete a driver and then reinstall it. This is something that's actually very easy to do. It's something that if you have some experience, you can actually do this yourself as long as you have access to the new drivers. Otherwise, many of you, of course, are used to calling your IT department and asking them to fix anything of this nature. But missing or corrupted drivers really are one of the easiest things to be able to fix yourself. You'll go into your add or remove programs inside your Windows control panel, and you would remove the individual driver, like for instance, for your printer, and then just go and find it online, or if you have the original software that came with the printer, install the driver from there, and it's easy peasy done. It really is a very quick and painless process. For anything more complicated than that, you would absolutely want to involve your information technology folks. And they may also be aware of some of the conflicts that you might not know about. For instance, there might have been a Microsoft Office or a Windows update that was done behind the scenes that actually caused the problem with the software driver. And so you might not know what was done behind the scenes. And that's another reason why it's so important to involve your IT department. Malware is yet another issue that you can encounter on your computer. This would be the antivirus software that you need to prevent viruses from accessing your computer files. Now, when viruses started many, many years ago, probably the day after the computer was invented, there were few methods of transmission of viruses initially. So it was simply a program that was written that had some negative intention behind it, and it could be distributed in a variety of ways. It might be something where you actually need to open up the executable file of the malware. Later, it became something that was included in email. And if you open up an email that had the virus attached, or you clicked on a link that came through an email, that would be something that you would see be covered by antivirus software. Over time, the methods of delivery of the malware have changed. Every time a new technology comes out, viruses tend to be adapted to be shared through that new technology. So, for example, Microsoft Office documents at one point were a carrier for viruses when people would embed macros in them. And that's why Microsoft did a change in how they handled macro-enabled documents, because they knew that that could be a very powerful way to do things like take over control of your computer. So they made it harder for anyone to include a macro in a document without you knowing about it. They effectively changed the default settings so that macros were disabled and you needed to enable them when you opened up your document. And it's a way of forcing you to make an educated decision about whether or not you want a macro to run at any given time on your computer. Other ways that malware has spread is that visiting websites. You can go and visit an infected website. The website host, the webmaster, has no idea that their site is even infected. This is not necessarily something where it is the website host that is at fault. It is someone who has hacked into their server that has uploaded the virus so that when someone goes to that website, it it launches the virus behind the scenes. So that's another way that it can be spread. Well, the problem is people often have antivirus software and they know that they need to keep their their lists of viruses updated. They know that. But what they don't always realize is that you also need to update the antivirus software itself. You need a later version of the antivirus software itself. And the reason that this matters is that a software can have a list of these viruses that it's checking for, but it's only going to check in the places it knows to check. Because viruses are constantly being adapted for new platforms, new technologies, like now, too, you have viruses being spread through Facebook Messenger. These are some of the latest ones. You have viruses spread through apps on phones. Now there's Mac viruses too. So that places that prior versions of the software never even thought to look, now they have to look. And so it's the software that gets updated that tells it where to look. The list of viruses is important to keep updated, but it's also important to update the software itself. I have a link here for a LifeWire site that has a nice little list of blue screen error codes. And so if you're ever getting any of the codes, those messages that come up, that is a really good starting place to figure out what that screen error is telling you and how you might be able to fix it. There's lots of other ways to find out. The simplest is if you ever get an error message that's like a Windows-based message, for example, copy the code and go and Google it and find out what that code actually indicates. Sometimes it's something that is very easy to fix. Other times you'll just deepen the mystery when you start looking at it, but it's always worth exploring to see if you can figure out what that code is and how it can reasonably be fixed. Hardware can be another issue that you would commonly encounter with computers. And this was the issue that I was struggling with my laptop. I had two different hard drives, which turned out to be fortuitous for me. So some of the issues that you can encounter here. One is internet or connectivity issues. With internet and connectivity issues, it's an inability to connect to the internet. And of course, so much of our work these days, especially when we're working from home, is internet based. We have to have access to the internet in order to do our work. There's a number of things that can cause internet or connectivity issues. Some examples would be if there were issues on the end of your internet service provider, so on their end, issues with the wiring itself, issues with the wiring inside your house, issues with your router, issues with your Wi-Fi, issues with your computer, where it may have lost the connection, for example. And so you kind of need to figure out where along the path is the issue. Some examples of how you can find that out. If you're having a problem with one website, it's probably on the website's end. If you can get to anywhere else on the internet, you're probably pretty safe in assuming that's a problem with the individual website. If you do a Google search on the name of the website and asking the question, is this website down? It actually there are a lot of websites out there that will tell you the status of individual websites. And so they will tell you this one's up, this one's down. Nowadays, it's much more common for multiple sites to go down because they're all behind the scenes hosted in the same place, such as Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services has had several outages recently. One just happened a couple of weeks ago that lasted for several hours and took down enormous players on the internet. Google has some of their sites on there. Facebook did. YouTube, of course, because it's owned by Google. There were a number of very large websites that were taken down with this Amazon Web Services outage. And there's a ton of mom and pops too. So if you're finding that you're having an issue with multiple sites, but not all of the internet, that could be the common thread, is that they're all hosted behind the scenes somewhere like in Amazon Web Services. If the issue is with your computer, you're going to start with the simplest possible solution, which is restart your computer. Our IT folks will always tell us this. It's the first thing they suggest. And the reason it's the first thing that they suggest is because it works in probably 80 to 90% of all the troubleshooting issues you'll have. If there's an issue with your computer, rebooting your computer will fix that issue. So that's always your go-to thing to try. Other things that you can try when it comes to internet and connectivity issues. Did you accidentally turn off the Wi-Fi capability? Are you in airplane mode? It's really easy to do that by accident. A lot of our laptops have keyboard shortcuts that will do that we might hit that button by accident. So it is absolutely worth double checking. Even though you're sure that you were connected earlier, you might have hit a button that put you into airplane mode or turned off the Wi-Fi signal. So those are some possibilities. Rebooting your router is another possibility. So if you're having issues and you're not seeing your network, check your phone. Is your phone seeing the network? And if you're not, then that's a really good indication that it could be your router that needs to be rebooted. So always try to think logically in that respect of what are the likely culprits that are causing these issues for me to be able to connect to the internet. Other issues you could have, something might have gotten bogged down with streaming. Like, for instance, you've got Netflix being downloaded, maybe your kids are in online school, and so you might have other things going on that are slowing down the internet connection. There are websites out there that will let you do a speed test of your internet connection, and so that could be something that is worth exploring to see if it is an issue with the speed of your internet connection. What are the things that can cause problems with that? Well, one of the biggest is if you happen to be using a cable modem. Cable modems are notorious for having slowdowns if multiple people in your neighborhood are actually all using the cable modems. So if you have a lot of people that are all on the same service for your internet service provider and it's cable based, then if they're all online at the same time, which is not uncommon these days with so many people working from home and so many kids doing online schooling, there's a lot more people online at any given time than there might have been, say, a year ago. And so that is something that can slow down the internet speed for cable modems. If someone in your household were downloading something like Netflix movie and it got stuck or something happened with that, that can cause a ripple effect to slow down your internet connectivity. So that's another thing that you can take a look for. Try closing anything that would be using the internet. So closing your email, for example, closing any music streaming that you have going on in the background. Any of that could be something worth taking a look at to see if it speeds up your internet. Another thing that can slow down your internet connectivity is that malware that we were talking about earlier. There is a lot of malware that behind the scenes sends requests to websites or sends information to websites. They can often have multiple connections open behind the scenes that you don't even realize are there, and it causes your computer to run slower and slower and slower. And then one last one that can cause issues as well, Microsoft OneDrive can sometimes cause issues, or any cloud-based system if you have it synchronizing files to your hard drive. It might be doing synchronization behind the scenes, and that's what's slowing down your computer performance. So those are all worth checking to see if they might be part of the issue if you're having an unexpected temporary issue with your computer running really slow. The hard drive failures, these are where over time your hard drive can have issues. Some of the older style hard drives have a lot of moving parts in them. They have a little spinning drive inside that can fail. And it's pretty common to have some of those older hard drives fail. That's why having backups of your files is so critical. Newer hard drives give you often an option for a solid state drive, which doesn't have the moving parts, which tends to be a little more stable. And so one of the things that was a blessing for me is it turned out my hard drive that had failed only had my program files on it. My second hard drive had my data on it. And so we were able to fully restore the data. And you might say, well, Maria, I thought you had backups of your data. Yes, I did. And I'm going to tell you why that didn't work out as well as I had hoped. And some of the problems that I had with my backups. So be prepared for hard drive failures. Sometimes you can tell that they are coming. You might hear a clicking sound in your computer. You might hear the hard drive spinning up a lot, like it's struggling to work, like it's kind of bogged down. So listen for some of those issues and use your eyes, use your ears, and really pay attention to your computer. You may notice something like that, and it starts giving you hints that there's a hard drive failure coming. And then you can make absolutely certain, hopefully, you do it before that point where you've got all your files backed up. And just that heart stopping moment of turning on your computer and it not turning on is just it's a horrible, horrible feeling. And I think all of us have experienced moments like that over time. But man, when you lose your data, it just is a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. And it is so preventable. It is so preventable that you can keep your data if you plan ahead. And if you don't wait until you have a hard drive failure to try to salvage it. There are some companies that specialize in salvaging hard drive failures. This is particularly true for things like fires or floods where there's been physical damage to the hard drive. Some of them are expensive, of course, but some of them are able to pull data off of heavily damaged hard drives. So as a last case scenario, that's an opportunity that you might need to take advantage of. Other things that can cause problems for computers. Your environment is one of the most critical factors to look at. If you regularly have power outages or brownouts, little power surges or glitches, you're going to want to look at investing in a UPS, which is an uninterruptible power source. That is essentially a big independent battery that you plug your computer into that stays constantly charged because it's plugged into the wall. And if there is a power glitch, if there's a brownout, if there's an actual power failure, it will provide power for everything plugged into it for a period of time. And how long that period of time will depend on how big the objects are that are pulling power that's plugged into the UPS, how powerful that UPS is. And so there's a lot of factors that go into it. But on average, you should look for one that will keep your equipment running for maybe 15 minutes or so. It gives you enough time to do a nice shutdown of your machine and to reduce issues from those power surges because it can stand in the way of them and prevent them from damaging your equipment. A lot of technology is very, very delicate when it comes to power surges. And so having it plugged into a device like that can really save you a lot of time and trouble when it comes to your technology. Pets. Oh my gosh, pets. I have 2 cats, and I know the struggles that come from having pets and having technology. Either cats that want to walk across your keyboard and possibly hit keyboard combinations that cause something to happen and you have no idea what they did, or rubbing up against things and knocking things over, or dogs jumping up, and there's just so many ways that pets can negatively impact our computers and our equipment. And much though I love them, I love my cats, they're a pain in the neck sometimes when it comes to the technology. And of course, one of the other big issues they cause is hair. And you get the fur and the hair that gets sucked into the machine because of the fans that are blowing air in to keep the machines cool. And that fur and dander and hair ends up clogging it. It blocks the vents. It makes the machines overheat. So it is important to try to keep your pets away from your technology as much as you can, to vacuum it out somewhat, very, very, very carefully with a vacuum that's designed for electronics, not your standard Hoover, which could, you don't want to go sticking that around the back of your computer. But if you use a very delicate vacuum, that can help to vacuum up that sort of thing. Or compressed air, cans of compressed air. That might be something you can use to help stay on top of pet hair and fur and keep it out of the inner workings of your computer. That's something that will shorten up the lifespan of your computer for sure if it gets inside. Liquids, if you are using, coffee, water, whatever, make sure it's in a container that is capped and kept away from your laptop or your keyboard. I've had issues with that in the past as well, where the cat's knocked over a cup and got liquid onto the keyboard, and that can just cause shorts. It can cause letters to malfunction. It can cause the whole motherboard to fail. So liquids can be very, very dangerous to have around electronics. You definitely want to try and keep that away if at all possible. If it does happen, of course, wipe it up as quickly as possible and then turn the machine upside down to let it drain well. Make sure you can get it as well drained as you can. Depending on the kind of device you're talking about, like if it was a phone, you could try putting it in the bag of rice. You guys have probably seen that as a tip. And that is designed to absorb the heat. It acts, or not absorb the heat, excuse me, absorb the liquid, the humidity, the some of what gets in there and corrodes the internal mechanisms of the machine. That's one of the biggest problems you encounter with issues with liquids is not just the effect of the liquid inside, it's the corrosion that it ultimately leads to. And then temperature is another factor as well, heat and cold. If you leave your laptop in your car, for instance, when you're going back and forth to work, you could end up having issues related to temperature, where if you don't let a very cold laptop, for instance, warm up to room temperature before you turn it on, you can cause problems. If a laptop is overheated, that can cause problems. So really try to watch out for those extremes of temperature. You want to keep it as controlled and as close to room temperature as you can. Passwords. Passwords are a classic issue, leaving us open and vulnerable to hackers. Do not share your passwords with anyone. Don't surf publicly. If you are in a public place, don't use public Wi Fi to go to private websites like your bank accounts, your PayPal, anything confidential. You would not want to have that be on your computer while you are surfing publicly. Don't reuse passwords either. I think it's so easy to get into a habit. I've been guilty of it myself, where we come up with some kind of a password and we think, oh, this is a great password. I'm going to use it everywhere. That way it'll be easy for me to remember. That's one of the reasons we do it. It's so hard to remember all the different passwords, but that is extremely dangerous. Once a hacker gets a combination of an email password or a user ID and a password, they will go and try that password combination out at practically every site they can find. They'll go to eBay, they'll go to PayPal, they'll go to every major bank site, they'll go to every investment site like Fidelity and other Charles Schwab and those kinds of sites. And they will try those combinations because very often people do reuse their passwords. And so if they get it, they can try it on all these sites and find out if you reused it anywhere else, and they will have access to those sites. That is a very common way that people end up getting hacked. And so that's one of the most dangerous things you can do. Don't reuse your passwords. And then, of course, don't write down a password on a Post-it note. A lot of people, especially in the home office, of course, we're thinking no one's there. But in a regular office, we may write it down on a password on a Post-it and put it on the back of our keyboard, for instance. We think, well, it's out of sight, nobody will see it. But you know what? If someone was looking for it, they're going to look around, the back of your computer, underneath your keyboard, in the drawers, anywhere that you might have stuck a Post-it that has a password written down on it. So don't use common passwords, the classic 1234566. Don't use passwords like that. Make your passwords unique, make them tough, make them hard to get hacked. And you might consider, as much as you can, use two-factor authentication. That would be where and I know it's annoying. I know how frustrating it is to work with, but that's where they send you a passcode on your phone, for example, that you have to type in order to access a website. There's a lot of ways two-factor authentication works. Sometimes it's hardware-based, sometimes it's software-based, where you have a PIN number of your own plus a key combination from somewhere. You might have a USB flash drive that you need to stick into your laptop that generates a new code every 30 seconds. It could be something going to your phone. There's a lot of ways it can work, but it absolutely does make you safer, even though it is less convenient. That's always going to be the trade off: security versus convenience. That's always the trade off. Excuse me. So, what are some preventative steps that you can take so that if this, heaven forbid, happened to you, you were actually as prepared as you possibly could be? Sorry, had to cough. One of the most important things that you can do is to identify what files are most critical to you. I found when my laptop was in the shop that there really were about, say, 10 to 20 files that were truly most critical. These were the ones that I couldn't run my business without, or that caused an enormous amount of inconvenience versus a minor amount of inconvenience of things like access to past documents for historical purposes or for reference. But the files that were most critical to me were the files where I'm updating them every single day. I'm working with them constantly. They're telling me the status of my business, or they're telling me about the projects that are going on that I really need to stay on top of. And so those files are the ones I miss the most. And those are the files that I take particular care with now to make sure I have multiple copies of them available. They're not just in one place, they are backed up regularly, and they are available to me no matter where I am. So I have cloud based backup as well as other types of backup. Which are the files that are pinned on your lists? You know, when we pin the files so that they stay at the top of our list so we have regular access to them, make a list for yourself of what are the files that are absolutely critical to me. The files that I really do work on every single day, and that if I don't have these, I'm kind of dead in the water for getting my work done. And it would be hugely inconvenient to recreate them from scratch. Those are the files you really want to make sure you're taking good care of. And then think about as well, not just those that are critical for daily work, but also those that might be critical for your taxes or critical for legal purposes, where they serve a higher purpose beyond just your daily work. And so they're particularly important in my perspective because if you don't have them, you could run into criminal issues or civil issues where you might get fined, for example, you would fail an audit, things like that. So, really think through what are those critical files out there. Back up your hard drives, and I would strongly suggest you have more than one backup. So, I mentioned this earlier that I had backups. I actually had three backups going of my laptop when it went into the shop. Something was wrong with every single one of the backups for different reasons and in different ways. So, between the three backups, I was pretty much able to reassemble almost all of my files. However, it was not as smooth as it should have been. And so some of the issues I had, one was I discovered one of my backups had selected the wrong folders, the wrong computer for backing up. So I have multiple computers I back up. One of them was supposed to include my laptop, and that was not included. It was backing up my desktop computer, it was backing up my husband's laptop. It was not backing up my laptop. So that was a problem with one backup site. One backup site was having issues where I think it was a misunderstanding on my part of how I was working with some of the files. It recreated the entire folder structure, but it didn't have all the files inside the folder structure. And so that was something that caused some big issues. So there were just a number of issues related to my backup. So one of the most important things that I would stress is when you do a backup, go in and test that backup periodically. Pull some files randomly from it. See how old they are. See if they are being overwritten when they're being updated so that you have the latest version possible. See if they have all of the files. Do a test to see, does it have all of the files from my main directory that I'm working with? Go by the number of files. Do some cross checks to make sure that it's actually backing up the files the way you think it is. The really horrible thing is to discover it's not doing the backups the way you think they are after you have a problem. You would much rather know that when you are in front of the problem and you can fix it before it's a problem. Make sure one of those options is cloud-based at least so that you can get to it from any computer anywhere via accessing through the internet. So in my case, I've chosen OneDrive for that purpose. I don't know that there's other options out there, though. That's not the only option. There's lots of them out there. Make sure it's going to be something that's automated so that you don't have to do a manual step to make those files back up. You wanted something where on a designated time period, whether it's every day or every week, your files are automatically getting backed up. Don't make it something where you have to remember to go in and click a button to get it started. And then make sure as well that your backups, at least one of them, are stored off-site. There's a lot of people that in their home offices, their backup process is, well, I'll put it on a flash drive. I'll do something of that nature. I'll do an external hard drive. But then they've got it on their desk right next to their laptop. And the problem is, what happens for the laptop is not necessarily something like the hard drive crashes. It could be something like your roof crashes under a tree that falls in a storm, or there's a fire in your home office. There's a flood because a pipe busts in the ceiling and it floods your desk. And now not only your laptop is destroyed, but the backup that was sitting right next to it on the desktop is also destroyed. And so you've got to have it off-site. You've got to have it outside of your household, outside of your office. And so that could be something like giving it to a trusted friend, a relative, could be a safe deposit box, but that's, of course, a little tedious to go and keep that updated. But then you also do need to have a procedure in place for how you're going to update the offsite copy. Could it be something like, I'm going to make a backup once a week, and when I go have dinner at my mom's, I'm going to swap out this week's backup for last week's backup. It could be something like that. But just make it a routine where you have a method of getting the backup done and it is offsite. Now, again, to me, the easiest with this is cloud-based, but I wouldn't necessarily want to only have one cloud-based backup, because what happens if Microsoft decides to shut down OneDrive without notice? I mean, I know it's not likely to happen, but you never know in the internet world when somebody's going to declare bankruptcy and all of a sudden they've shut down and there's no notice. So always have a backup to your backup. And then one more food for thought item, confirm what your IT folks are actually backing up. A lot of people assume that their technology group is backing up everything on their laptop, and that's not necessarily true. A lot of them are not backing up things that are on your local hard drive, so your C drive in your laptop. A lot of times that's not being backed up. So you should have all your files on your network drive. Some people, though, are, renegades, or they don't know better and they're storing things also on their local hard drive. That may not be getting backed up. Email. Not all IT departments are backing up email. So that's something you're going to want to check and see. Is that getting backed up every night? And internet sites, your list of your favorites, your bookmarked websites. Those are often not being backed up, and that is often stored on your local hard drive. So that's the kind of thing that you might want to just double check with your IT folks. what could I possibly be working with here that would not be backed up so that I can either change where I'm storing it, like saving my favorites onto the network drive instead of onto my hard drive, or making a backup myself of those items so that if something happened, I'm covered. But really think through your backup options and ask some questions of your IT folks, because a lot of people find out the hard way things are not as well covered as they thought they were. And your IT folks will have sympathy, but there's nothing they can do if your computer completely crashes and they're not making backups of it. There won't be anything they can do to help you. So, what can you do to mitigate the damage if you do find that your laptop has crashed and it is indeed the worst case scenario, and that you are not going to be able to 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 get that computer back? What do you do? Well, first, don't panic. You might have some options. The very first thing to try is ask whoever has your computer and is working on it, is there any way they can salvage the data? Sometimes they can. So that could be an option for you. Even though the computer may be dead, that doesn't mean they can't necessarily salvage the data. Ask around for second opinions. Also, I mentioned earlier that there are some websites, some companies out there that specialize in pulling off data from damaged hard drives. Maybe that could be an option for you. Look at alternative computers, but really move carefully. Think about how you might be able to transfer that data over, how you might be able to pull in your backup data. There might be some options there, but really choose carefully what your next machine is. Learn to ask the right questions. Where's the work going to be done? How is the computer going to be shipped? Will they make a backup of the files before they do anything? How are they going to communicate with you? Ask all those kinds of questions up front so that you know what to expect and so you don't get as many unpleasant surprises later in the process. So for making a backup of the files before they do anything, that will sometimes incur a cost. So this is for your personal computers here, not your work ones, of course. With your computer, if you don't have a backup, it is absolutely worth paying to have them make a backup before they start futzing around with your computer. It's worth it. Just bite the bullet, pay the money, and get that done. The ideal would be, of course, that you know you have a backup yourself and that your files are good and you're good to go. The very first time that I had the issue with my laptop, I told them no on making a backup of the files because I thought I have 3 backups at home. I don't need this. I'm covered. I wasn't as well covered as I thought I was. And I went through a real heart-stopping moment when they thought initially, they called and told me the hard drive had failed and they had lost all the data. They did not know initially that I had 2 hard drives and that my data was actually on the second hard drive. So when they called and told me my hard drive had failed and everything had been lost, I had that horrible heart-stopping moment that ultimately was not as bad as it could have been because they were able to restore my data. So ask the questions and find out before you start. In the worst case scenario, you really do have to reconstruct your data from scratch. When you're going to put it all back together from scratch, pull every copy that you do have. If you have ever made backups, get those backups and put those all together into one folder. Don't forget about your email. When you send an email to someone, that generates a copy of your file. So if you have access to your email, even though you don't have access to your data files, you might actually be able to pull the files from your email sent items folder. So that's an option to look at. You can also, of course, contact the people who got the emails, who received them, and ask them if they can send you back a copy of some of those emails. So that's a potential resource for you with your files. Who have you shared that document with? See if they can provide that copy back to you. Double check the versions. You cannot always go by the date of the file. You can't assume that the latest date is the correct date. when you have multiple versions of a file. And so there's a lot of times where it can happen that a later date is not the latest copy. If you're copying and pasting between locations, it could be that you copied and pasted a second copy into, say, a cloud-based system. Later, it made it look like it has a later date, but in reality, it was the wrong version that was being copied there. And so that's a problem that can happen. There will be times where you have discrepancies of dates and times, and you might need to actually open the files and take a look at them to figure out which is which and which one is the correct version. Don't make the mistake of just assuming the latest version is always the correct version. It isn't always if you're working across multiple devices. And I run into this with some regularity because I will often be working on the exact same file on more than one computer at a time. So I'll be working on my desktop, I'll have it on my laptop, I might even open it on my phone. And it's not always accurate that the last thing that saved it was the correct version. So it really is something to keep an eye on if there's any possibility that you've done editing on more than one computer, you want to make sure which copy is the right copy. So what am I doing differently now, having gone through all this angst and trouble? Well, I am checking my backups more thoroughly. I'm reviewing them to make sure that they really are bringing over all the files, that the files are actually working. I can open them and I can access them. That was an issue I had as well. Some of my files got corrupted in that process. I could not open them up to edit them or review them. I am making my cloud the master. And so I still make backups from it, but I'm making the internet copy be the master copy so that I know that is always the latest version. That is always the correct version. And so when I'm working on my individual computers, I'm pulling it down from the cloud to keep the cloud as my master. I am storing backups offsite, both through the cloud and through other methods. I'm adding calendar reminders for myself to go back and double check periodically, to do cross checks. And so that's something that I've added in on my calendar to, just go and make sure systems are all go. As I said, I'm double checking that those backups are actually working correctly. I'm not just checking to be sure that they are backed up. I'm checking to be sure that the backups are good files. I've created a master list of critical files, and I triple check those backups. I really did find it was only like 10 or 20 files out of thousands and thousands of files that I have that I needed most regularly. And so this is something that I now keep an eye particularly on those critical files to make sure that they are always good to go, multiple backups, and ready at a moment's notice, no matter where I am, and that I can always access them from anywhere. And I also reevaluated my email and my calendar and how I could access that from more than one location. I have added Microsoft Exchange Server on so that all of my copies are synchronized across all of the different software. And so this has helped tremendously. And it also makes life more convenient every day to have everything up to date, no matter where I am or what device I'm using to access it. It really is much more efficient that way. So I included the any questions slide here just because I wanted to say, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments section. If you've enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, please include a comment underneath here for the YouTube channel. I would greatly appreciate any feedback that you have on this program. Thank you for sticking with it. So again, my name is Marie Herman. I'm with MRH Enterprises, LLC. I am so happy to be here for Executive Secretary Magazine's Admin Chat. And if you'd like to check out my website, it's mrhenterprises.com. I provide tutoring for the Certified Administrative Professional exam, the Google Workspace and Microsoft Office Specialist exams. I have advanced Microsoft Office training, and I also provide training for technology and professional development. So if you'd like to learn more, please check out my website. And in the meantime, continue checking out Executive Secretary Magazine's Admin Chat channel every single week. Fantastic videos are put up by amazing trainers from around the world. I'm honored to be included among them. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and hopefully I'll see you in a future session.